All right. Hello, AP Seminar. So not sure why you all didn't join me today on the Zoom. I think it's partly due to our schools being called closed. And so you guys may have assumed that I wasn't able to join you, but I was. So I'm going to record what we're going to talk about today in person. Just a quick note, please make sure you guys record your presentations with your conspiracy theories. So do it the exact same way that you did it with the presentations we did with before in the music genre project. That way I'm able to review those and look, because we won't have class or time in class when we meet in person the next few times because of our short time constraints. So if we do, I'll have you guys present. We'll do one day and another the other day. But I don't anticipate that being something we can do based on our limited time capacity. So record it for me just in case, and then we'll see if we can do them in person as well, or virtually in person, I should say. So what I wanted to look at today is actually talking more about the IRR, the breakdown of the rubric for the IRR, the individual research reports. Sounds like a CLRRR. And then I want you guys to see a perfect paper. You've actually already seen the perfect paper, the high scoring paper, but we're going to look at it again, and I'm going to go over it a little bit more detailed, because in the next few days, probably tomorrow, if even, depending on weather circumstances, you guys are going to start your mock PT1. So the mock PT1, your performance task 1, is a very important project, because it is going to be you working with a team of your choice to actually go through the steps of the actual performance task 1, in the hopes that you are able to do the entire task to its completion, because then I'm able to provide feedback. Sorry, I had a little bit of brain fart there for a second. So I'm able to give you full feedback on the mock PT1, because it's not the assignment that's actually going to College Board. So in case you did not remember, I am not allowed as your teacher to provide you with feedback on any item that is actually submitted for your College Board score. So the real PT1, the real PT2, I can guide, I can give class lessons, I can go over high level things in class, but I can't specifically give you feedback on your papers, on your sources, on your presentations. Even when I'm grading your presentations, I can't release those grades to you. I have to give them to College Board, and they put them together for your final score. So it's a whole ordeal. But in order for me to give you a chance to actually get that feedback, because it's very important, we do a mock PT1. I do a little bit of an adaptation to kind of get you ready for PT2 as well, because they're very similar, except one is a group project, one is individual. And there's one more component that actually makes it a little bit trickier for PT2 that I layer into our mock. So I'll go over that too. Not today, but I'll go over that when we go over mock PT1. But today I really want to dive deep into the IRR, because I don't think I have yet. And I want to make sure you guys are ready for that type of writing. You guys did an IRR sample, and from what I read, they were good. You guys know how to definitely discuss research and summarize research, but I want to make sure you hit all the levels of the rubric as well. So I'm going to share my screen and show you where all of these items are. So if you go to your Schoology page, I just put this folder in today. It's the Wednesday 11/9 virtual class. You're going to see IRR rubric with notes. That is the actual rubric itself. You've seen it before, just the rubric form. This one has detailed notes that we're going to go over here in a second. Then there is the high scoring IRR. It's the one about Cambodian women. You may have remember reading that before when you did the IRR sort. And then underneath that is the high score sample notes. That actually tells you what the readers said about that paper. So we're going to go over all of that together right now. So I'm going to open up the rubric first so we can see this one, the detailed what they're looking for. So this is the rubric for the IRR, and it comes with scoring notes. So when I'm sitting and watching a group present, I literally have this rubric in front of me. And what's nice is that it kind of gives you questions to ask yourself while you're seeing a presentation or reading a paper. And you answer them as you go. So yes, they did that. Great. This is the score they would earn. No, they didn't. Okay, this is the score they would earn. So we're going to go row by row. It's going to feel redundant, hopefully, because we've seen this before, but it should be. Redundancy is a great way for us to really reinforce the skills that we need. So Number one, rubric row one is understanding and analyze the context. So we always focus on rubric row, the rubric column, that's the highest score. So we want 6s across the board, except the last 2, which are 3s. So the report situates the student's investigation and the complexities of a problem or issue in research that draws upon a wide variety of appropriate sources. It makes clear the significance of the larger context. This is all about showing us that you have found a real problem and you've explained why that's a problem that we should be looking at. Why is it something that we should care about, essentially? And you have to really bring that in. This is normally found in the first paragraph. It's where you build your context in. This is my second year as a reader, and no, I usually score the IWA. So, but both papers are similar in that they have this row. And as a reader, we really look for this in the first paragraph. If we don't find it there, we'll look beyond. But really, if it's not in the first paragraph, it's unclear as to the importance of the argument. So you really want to put that in your first paragraph, build that context. So let's look at the scoring. It says, is the area of investigation focused and situated in the student's research? Where to look? Often titles and first paragraphs. See, it even says it there. Review bibliography or works cited. So that's to make sure that you have sources that prove, right? It's not just your voice. You guys aren't experts yet. You are using experts to prove your point. So if it's a yes, then all across the board, it's got to be yes for all 3 of these, right? Yes, the area of investigation is clearly stated and narrow enough to address the complexity of the problem. Yes, it draws on some academic scholarly sources. And yes, the significance is made clear. So it's proven that there's a problem, and it's not an easy, simple problem. It's not like people are hungry in the world. Okay, we know that. That's very general, but can we find a more complex version of it? Is it that there are food deserts in certain communities because they don't have access to a grocery store? Okay, now we're getting into a complex situation. Now we're looking at socioeconomics. Now we're looking at political, right? So that we want the complexities there. Draws upon academic scholarly sources. So again, you have to prove that this is a problem. So you want to cite a source. I know we're used to, when we're writing for English classes in the past, that the introduction doesn't really have sources in it. This paper will. You will be citing someone in your introduction. If you don't have a citation in your introduction, then you're not really providing that scholarly source to prove the complexity or to prove that this is a real problem. And then the significance. We want to make sure it's an actual problem that's affecting the world. If you do most of that, you can get a medium score, which is a 4. And so this one says, yes, but it may try to deal with too many aspects of the topic. So again, if you said people are hungry in the world, yeah, that's too hard. I mean, yeah, that's a problem. It's definitely a problem in the world, but it's too much. You can't answer that question. You can't assess that situation fully in 1,500 words, in 1,200 words, in the mock will be 750. So you're not going to be able to do that. And so you want to make sure you're specific enough that your paper is actually addressing it. And then yes, but may be over-reliant on journalistic sources or lack of academic scholarly sources. Again, we're looking for tier 1s and tier 2s. We're not looking for tier 3s, tier 4s, and definitely not tier 5s. We're looking for our high level sources. We want to make sure that we are using the academic journals, the peer-reviewed papers, the scientific, all of those are what we're looking for. So we're going to use our EBSCOs. We're going to use our JSTORs. I'll get you guys access to JSTOR. We're going to use Google Scholar. Those are going to help us to really identify those good sources. And then if you don't have any of that, you're getting a low 2. It's not easy to get a 0 in a rubric, just so you guys know. They tend to not throw a 0 around pretty quickly. So as long as you're giving an attempt at writing something scholarly, they're going to try and give you points. So they're not passing points. Like a 2 across the board is really not going to get you a passing score in an IRR, but you're getting something. So just be aware, you're not going to see zeros on this. All right, so let's take a look at the next rubric row. So this is understanding and analyzing an arguments. First row, or the first column rather. The report demonstrates an understanding of the reasoning and the validity of the source's arguments. This can be evidenced by direct explanation or through purposeful use of reasoning and conclusions. Okay, so when we're deciding the score, does the report demonstrate an understanding of the reasoning and validity of arguments from the sources they have used? through direct explanation and purposeful use. This entire row is about how you talk about the sources you bring in. So it's not just enough to cite a source and to provide a quote. You have to explain, you have to connect, you have to explain why that source, why that quote is related to your overall problem, is related to the perspective you're providing, is in conversation with the perspective, right? You have to give your voice to the voices you're bringing into your paper. So will often appears in the end of the paragraphs and or immediately following a citation as part of the commentary on a source. So ordinarily what happens is you have a body paragraph that is, this starts with mostly source information, and then it ends with the commentary. Or if you're doing it in a different format, because again, the format's up to you all, you can have a quote, and then right after that quote, a discussion, and then another quote and a discussion. When you're thinking about it in English terms, you can think of it as that elaboration piece, right? We have evidence and elaboration. This is the elaboration portion. So scoring high in this one, the question is, does the report demonstrate understanding of the reasoning and validity of arguments from the sources they have used? Yes. Commentary engages with and demonstrates understanding of the author's reasoning. So, and then yes, but limits explanation to author's reasoning. You have to, if you're just summarizing the quote in your words, they'll give you some points for that. You'll get your 4 points, but it's not showing that you thoroughly understand it and you're engaging with it and that you're using it to your paper's purpose. So you want to make sure that you're always connecting it back to what the research question is or to what that section, that subtopic you're addressing in the paper is. Always connecting their language with your language. All right. Next row is evaluate sources and evidence. So this is a big one. This is one that I commonly see as a mistake in students for their first mock. And it usually does get corrected after the mock because, again, for the mock, I'm going to be a little bit mean in my grading. I'm going to be very honest because I want to make sure you don't make mistakes on your real one. So let's look at the first row, the key row, the 6 points. The report demonstrates evaluation and credibility of the sources and selection of relevant evidence from the source. Both can be evidenced by direct explanation or through purposeful use. So here's the question. Is the evidence well selected and well used? Is the evidence consistently relevant and credible? Where to look throughout whenever their evidence is presented, credibility may be established by source selection in the bibliography. So yes, goes beyond mere description and attribution. Remember, purposeful use. So it's not just that you're referencing them, but you're actually telling us why that's a good source to use. So I'll give an example. Instead of saying, Mr. Combrinck said, blobbity, 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 or sorry, I'll give you a real quote. Ready? Mr. Combrinck said that AP seminar students tend to make mistakes on this row of the rubric. Okay. Like, that's a good source. That's fine. Sounds like he's a teacher, right? I'm not sure the credibility. So, but if I said Mr. Combrinck, who's been an AP grader for 2 years, as well as a teacher with a high passage rates for AP seminar students at Don Swofer Aventura High School, says that most students make a mistake on this rubric row. Oh, that's bigger, right? I've given myself credibility. I've discussed why I'm credible. I discussed why I'm a perspective that people want to hear about the topic we're talking about. So I'm giving you full understanding of why this is important, right? I've given my credibility. I've made sure I've connected my source to what I want to talk about, okay? So yes, goes beyond mere description and the attribution. Remember, purposeful use. Yes, but references to credibility of sources are more descriptive than analytic attributed phases. So again, if I just said Mr. Combrinck, a teacher, that would have been a 4. Mr. Combrinck, an AP seminar teacher for this many years with this type of credibility, that's the 6. There is attention to the evidence, but the source may treat all evidence as equal when it is not. Sometimes you have to be the evaluator, and you will say in your paper, you may say, okay, I'm going to talk about Mr. Combrinck's perspective, but I'm also going to bring in this first-year teacher's perspective because that's valuable perspective. Sometimes we want to see a new person compared to someone who's done it for a while. And so therefore, you want to have that conversation in your paper. So you'll say, after giving the quote, something along the lines of, it's important to note that such and such, the author, has only been doing this for 2 years, so their perspective is limited. However, it's still valuable, right? You're having that conversation, you're talking about it. You're not just saying, oh, well, here's a teacher and here's a teacher, and both of the sources are absolutely perfect to talk about. Well, there's some sources that are more prominent than others. We want to address that in our paper as well. Okay, next row, understanding and analyzing perspectives. This is also a big one, and this is another one that is difficult, I find, for students to achieve successfully the first time. The report discusses a range of perspectives and draws explicit and relevant connections among those perspectives. So this is all about having multiple voices, having a conversation together. They need to talk to each other. And I always talk about conversations in sources as when you think of I listen to a lot of podcasts, love podcasts. They're really cool for me. I enjoy them a lot. Driving to work, sitting around the house, listening to a podcast. When you listen to a podcast like the New York Times does them often, they do like a report on some story. They actually did one recently about, it was teacher or parents were changing the school system in New York. It's a really cool podcast. They talk to a lot of people, administrators and parents and students and owners of schools and school board members and all these different people. None of those people ever spoke to each other in the article. They never talked to each other physically. What the reporter did is they would say things like, when I spoke to Johnson, they mentioned this. School Administrator Johnson said this. The parents agreed with Johnson's statement when they said this, right? The parents and School Administrator Johnson never spoke to each other. It was the reporter that connected them. They had that conversation for them. And that's what you're going to do in your paper. You're going to have those conversations. So you're going to find an article all about, let's find a silly topic, sharks. Let's use sharks as a topic. You're going to find an article all about sharks in the Pacific Ocean depleting populations. I don't know. And then you're going to find an article about marine biologists talking about them in the Atlantic Ocean, right? These two marine biologists may have never spoken to each other, but we're going to talk about them together. So we're going to say this author discusses the population decrease in the Pacific Ocean. That's correlated and connected with the Atlantic Ocean surplus of populations. And maybe they talk about a specific species of shark in here, and it correlates with this shark here. And so we have that conversation about those sharks together. Again, they didn't talk, but they're talking. Okay. So the question we ask here is there a range of perspectives in the report, and are they clearly connected? The good rule of thumb, and this is like the minimum, right? Go above and beyond this as much as possible, but having at least 2 different sources per body paragraph is the key. If you're not having at least 2, you can't possibly be having a conversation. So make sure you're having at least 2 sources in there. And sources can agree, sources can disagree, sources can somewhat agree. Oftentimes students struggle with the fact that they'll come up with a problem that's a pretty universally understood problem, and they'll say, I can't find someone who doesn't agree with this. And I said, it's fine. Well, yeah, we agree that hurricanes are detrimental to the society, as I'm sitting here with a tropical storm outside my door. And everyone agrees that they're not great. But there are disagreements about where it affects most. Is it more of an economic issue? Well, if I talk to a politician, or if I talk to someone who's economically centered, they're going to look at the money of it, right? How much does it cost for emergency disaster relief? How much does it cost for insurance relief? How much does it cost for this? If I talk to a doctor, they're going to look at it more on casualties and on injuries during the hurricane. So everyone will have their own perspectives, even if there's universally agreed upon parts. So keep that in mind when you're researching that. Yes, it may be a psychological issue that everyone agrees is a problem, but each psychologist will have a different reason why it's a problem or what the cause of that problem is. So that's where you can really bring in some multiple perspectives. So if I'm answering this question and I see that, yes, it goes beyond mere identification, perspectives are in conversation with each other, they're not randomly listed, but contribute to the whole, then you're getting the point. So again, if you're intentional about where you talk to it, where they talk, how they talk, you're getting points. For 4 points, it's yes, multiple perspectives, but only general connections. The connections need to be inferred. So if you're just saying, if every time you make a connection, it's so-and-so agrees with this when they say this. Johnson and Johnson say this, you get very descriptive. And then at the end of it, you say, such and such also agrees when they said this. I mean, no, I mean, that's a 4, right? Because you're just giving me surface level connections. If you really dive deep and you say they agree with the statement, however, they also go on to say, okay, now we're getting into some complexity there. And that's what they want to, that's what they're looking for. The last 2 rows are some easy, simple ones. This is your bread and butter. This is your freebie 6 points for your paper. So don't miss these because they're the easy ones. One is using your citations correctly. APA citation is what we're using. We're looking for a parenthetical, making sure that we have the author's last name, comma, the year of the publication. If there is a page number, because it's a journal, then you put the page number in there as well. That goes in the paper while you're writing. And then at the end, you do your citations with your hanging indents, just like you're used to. With MLA, it's almost the same formatting and the format. Remember, you can utilize citation machines. You can utilize those different tools. That's fine. Just make sure you check that they didn't make a mistake, because they sometimes do. And if you use EBSCO, they do it for you. So don't be silly. Use the tools they give you. EBSCO is like amazing because, again, it cites things for us, and that's just one less thing we have to worry about. Also, make sure they're alphabetical order, because you could lose points for that too. But again, this one is just saying that, yes, you did it without any flaws. The last one is conventions. It's writing. Make sure your writing style is clear. Make sure you're writing to an academic audience. So it shouldn't be... So me and my buds were sitting in class wondering, what is the biggest problem in the world? And then Frankie came up and said to me, right, that's not academic. Sure, it's clear. I understand what you're saying, but it's not written for your intended audience. And so you're going to lose points on that one. So make sure you're writing it in a style that's academic based, and make sure you have minimal grammar mistakes, punctuation mistakes. A typo here and there is not going to knock points off, because 1 or 2 mistakes is not bad. It happens. We're not perfect. But if it's a consistent mistake, like it's a consistent comma misplacement, if it's a consistent capitalization error, that's going to start losing you points. As a grader, one of the things that I would notice most often were capitalization errors in things like titles, or in names, proper names, in I. So make sure you don't make those silly mistakes, because that will throw a reader through a loop. And usually if it throws a reader through a loop, that's when they'll start considering taking points off. If it's 1 or 2, it's like, oh, I read right over it. I didn't even notice that. But if it's consistent, we start noticing and it gets crazy. Okay, that's the rubric. That was a lot. This video is getting longer than I thought it was going to be, but that's okay, because it's all important information. So now what I want to look at is the student response. We're not going to read through the whole thing. You've already read it. So we're going to just take a look at it. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Okay. So this was the article about Cambodian women in the workforce, generations of change. It's in the folder, so you can reread it over again as well. But I want you to just notice a few things. We're going to go over only a couple things. One, APA citation. They have APA in here. So you can use this to help model your citation style for your papers, because they're using APA citation. The only thing I would say is that they made a mistake here in the and that should be the and symbol because it's in the parentheses, but not a huge deal. They didn't lose points for that because it's a simple thing and they consistently did it, so they're fine. All right. So the Cambodian women saying, right, they start with a quote. They cite their quote. All right. So they're already giving context to an author. That's important. Notice that. Women in Cambodia face unequal opportunities in the workforce due to gender disparity. Their present situation is a tug of war between historical and cultural expectations of the past and increasing social changes aimed at improving the future. The progress of women's roles in the workforce is hindered by influence of older generations and cultural texts such as the cannot pronounce that, won't even try, which moralize adherence to Cambodian tradition. However, recent social change in Cambodia may counter this static culture significantly, creating opportunities for women to receive higher education and take more control over their lives. So they're already talking about the importance of it, right? They're looking at, it says here, women in Cambodia face unequal opportunities, right? That's a problem. We want equality amongst everyone. They talked about the reasons with that that start that. We can clearly see the lens that they're looking at this through. So hopefully you noticed that, looking at it through a social lens, right? Cultural, social lens. So that's really what they focused on, was the cultural and social. So they're looking at these different cultural texts. They're looking at the historical aspects of why this is the case in Cambodia. So that's giving focus into what their paper is all about. So great first paragraph, and sets them up for success going down the line. Again, I don't want to read the whole thing, even though I want to, but I know timing wise, I don't have time to do that. So I'm not going to do that. We're just going to highlight a couple things here. One, source. They've got 2 sources. That's good. Body paragraph needs at least 2 sources. In fact, they've got 3. No, this is actually the same one as down here. This is Chin, right? And there's Brickle again. So they have 3 sources in this one body paragraph. And I can't identify the sentences now, but when we look at the scoring guidelines, you'll see that they put them in conversation, right? They have a conversation between the different sources. It's really, you can often see that conversation best when the sources are layered staggeredly. That's a good way to word it. So they brought up Brickle here, and then they brought up Chin here, and then they brought back in Brickle. So it's showing that they're layering their sources in to really drive the argument, not drive the argument, because again, this is not an argument, but to drive that portion of the paper, to drive that idea that they're trying to drive into there. All right, let's look at our next one. Source 1, source 2, right? And so these are things that as a reader, that's what I'm glancing at over first. Before I'm fully diving into the paper to find each thing, I'm looking and seeing, okay, is there only one source in this paragraph? That's going to be hard to show me that they're having conversations. So now I'm already thinking that's going to lose some points. I'll go in and read, obviously, because sometimes people get creative with how they cite, but it's usually a good indicator that they haven't done conversation if there's only one source per paragraph. So two citations, great. This is probably going to have a good conversation. I'll go in and find that. Same thing here. Notice these are the same sources as well in a different paragraph. That's fine. They're having different perspectives. They're talking about different parts of their sources. Completely acceptable. Another one here, we've got Ledgewood again, and now Ledgewood's talking with a different source, World Bank, right? So we're getting those perspectives, and then we brought in Black and Len again. Wow. So now we're really layering in other sources to come in the conversation at the same time. Chin, oh my gosh, now we brought back a source from the beginning of the article, because they also share this perspective. This is great. Or they're alternating perspectives. We're not going to read through it, but you get what I'm saying. So you can see the multiple layers of sources. There's great explanation in here of why the sources connect. You can also see that sometimes the source is directly quoted, and sometimes the source is paraphrased. So in this portion, they paraphrase things that Chin said, and that's fine too. You should have a difference between both. Don't just write paraphrases. I know if for those that took global perspectives, that is what is usually taught for global perspectives is more summarization, because of the report, the Turnitin reports, and how you want a very low percentage. For this paper, you can have a high percentage of plagiarism. It's not plagiarism because you're citing them, but you can have a high percentage of other people's work in your paper. You're reporting on other people's work, so it's going to look like you're not bringing in your own original thoughts. It should not be 100%, because you're obviously bringing in your conversation too. But if it's a high percentage, that's not a huge deal in AP seminar, just so you're aware of that. I want everyone to freak out about that. Okay, so let's take a look at their works cited page. All right, again, they use APA citation. So here they have their hanging indents. They've got their authors in alphabetical order going down the line. Yeah, it looks really good. This is a great paper. Let's see what AP said about it. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. So rubric row 1. The report earned a 6 in row 1 because it isolates a precise area of study, how cultural norms shape Cambodian women's work lives in over generations, makes clear the importance of the topic, right? We talked about that in the introduction. The bibliography consists of 2 news sources, so they brought in sources to prove that, right? We saw that in the beginning. 3 academic journals and 1 statistical source and 1 updated EDU. So they had great sources in there that show that it's a problem. They also had a good connection in the introduction to really bring that context in. Next row, understanding the argument. The report earned 6 because it consistently provided insightful analysis of arguments derived from the sources. On example, page 1, the report notes the cultural power of that one I can't pronounce, and links this national identity within the context of the French colonial past. The rest of the paragraph teases out the conflict between a text that's important to national identity, but that dismisses women's contributions. Another example is in the second paragraph on page 4, questions the statistical argument provided in a journal article. So they, again, did a good job of making those connections. Rubric row 3 earned a 6 because it uses academic peer-reviewed material well and overall provides abundant rationale for the inclusion of other types of sources. While a more precise case could have been made for Chin, elsewhere, the treatment of sources is apt. For example, on page 3 to 4, the report uses details from a news source about Access Lita's Dutch's personal experience to suggest the pervasiveness of generational advice given to women. The report then followed with the research conclusions from a university anthropologist, albeit from an undated source on faculty webpage. Ideally, that research conclusion could have been from a dated, current peer-reviewed source. The case is implicitly made for a Dutch as credible source for influence and Judy Ledgewood's credibility for anthropological study. So they gave credibility to the sources, but notice that it wasn't perfect, because it doesn't have to be perfect, right? AP Seminar is not saying, oh, we got to have it exactly perfect. No, you guys are new researchers. You're learning these skills. So yeah, it would have been much better if they had a dated source, because a dated source is much more credible. We can see what year it was written. Is it still within the relevancy of the argument? Was it written before a drastic change? Was it written too far after? We don't know that because there's no date on it. So it would have been better to have a dated source. However, it was still enough that it really does show a different perspective, an important perspective, and it was explained what that perspective was. Row 4, understanding and analyze the perspectives, because it consistently draws complex connections among the sources, sometimes using one source to corroborate another, sometimes teasing out differences, sometimes building a coherent research narrative from the literature. Examples abound in each paragraph of the report. So go back and look at that, because they really did a good job of putting those different perspectives in conversation. And so notice, it's not just, I agree, they agree, they agree, they agree. They varied it. Some of them are agreeing. Some of them are not agreeing. Some of them are sharing differences, and it could be small differences, right? Even it could be like one idea different. That's still a conversation. That's still showing a different perspective. And then their conventions, they use their citations correctly. And then their grammar was also appropriate and academic. So they got all the points for it. So this is a perfect paper. It's a great model paper. Highly recommend using this as your sample when you're actually writing yours for 2 reasons. 1, it's perfect scoring. 2, it's APA citation, which is helpful to you as a student who is going to be using APA citation. Yeah. Okay. So your assignment for today, I think you guys are done with class at this point. So this might be your assignment for tomorrow, is I want you just to reread the sample paper, because I think that's important. And then I want you guys don't forget to record your all's videos. That was a long time ago. That was like 45 minutes ago, I think, or 30 minutes ago of me talking. Make sure you record those so I can grade those and give you guys feedback on your presentations. But I want you to read this perfect paper again, and I want you to look at it. And then we're going to start talking about your mock PT1. I'm not sure about where I will be tomorrow, whether I'm in the classroom, but I should be able to get back online, just like I was today, wherever I am. So we should be able to have our virtual class. So log into Zoom, and I'll be there, and we'll talk more about the mock PT1. All right, I'm going to stop recording now, submit this into Schoology so you guys can watch it, hopefully, and then we'll be good to go. I can stop sharing now. All right, I will see you all in the near future.